a writer's pen, and a vampire's thirst. Everything is at stake in this dark romance. The castle was located in the forests of Hungary, a standing relic of a bygone era when knights fought valiantly and landowners built huge estates. It was a modest-sized building, built upon a hefty foundation, and boasted a beautiful surrounding area. The lords of the land had been fond of planting vineyards to create wine that they would savor with their meals. Now, the vineyards flourished and the area prospered from their beauty. The large delivery truck slowly came rumbling up the road until it stopped in the courtyard of the estate. It was followed by a sleek black car that parked to the left of it. The car driver got out. His body was firm and dressed in a casual suit, his brunette hair slicked to the side. He stopped to take a full view of the castle and took a deep, refreshing breath of the natural air, releasing it as he smiled. This was his new home. It was an excellent purchase, and he was ready to move in. Thankfully, the previous owner had kept it furnished. Of course, he brought his own things along to make it more homely for him, namely his books and laptop. He turned to see the driver of the truck come up to him. He nodded. "Thank you for the directions. Welcome to my new home." The truck driver gulped gently. "Sir, I really think you should reconsider your home. This castle is cursed." "Yeah, I've heard that." The man brushed off the warning. "I think I'll be okay." "No, you don't understand." The driver shook his head. "There was a woman, Baronin Sibylla Horexny, who once owned this castle, and some say her ghost still inhabits this land. That's why nobody lives here." The man shook his head, raising his hand. "I get it. I'll do my best to be careful. Thank you for the warning, but I think I have better odds against any spirits." The driver scoffed. "What skill do you have, sir? Are you a minister or some form of spiritual fighter?" "Nope," the man replied, reaching into the back of his car and pulling out a book to hand to the driver. "I'm a writer." The driver looked at the book. It was a paranormal romance novel, written by the man, Clyde Scotty. He looked back to the man. "Do you think this will give you skill against ghosts?" Clyde smiled, lighting a cigarette. "I think it'll even my odds. Can you give me a hand bringing my stuff into the castle? I would greatly appreciate it." The driver shrugged, nodding and moving to open the back of the truck. Clyde ashed his cigarette and got to work, moving the boxes of stuff into the castle. The driver assisted him, bringing in the boxes to where Clyde directed him. The inside of the castle was surprisingly clean and inviting. The two continued to work until the truck was cleared out. Once the truck was empty, Clyde paid the driver with an additional few $100 and waved him off. After closing the door, he turned and looked around the foyer, noting the art on the walls. They were beautiful, mysterious, and seemingly new at the same time. It was truly incredible. This castle was a straight-up excellent purchase. "Oh yeah," he smiled. "This is going to be perfect." Moving to the staircase, he walked up towards the bedchamber and opened the door, checking out the large bed before him. It was cozy and had a fireplace in the chamber, offering a great place for warmth in the room on the cold Hungarian nights. Clyde took note of the ceiling and spotted a panel that seemed off, but nothing too unusual. Probably an old spy hatch used for war or something. After setting up his office, Clyde had a quick dinner and sat at his desk, typing away on his laptop. He had published over 33 erotic romance novels. This new one would be 34, and it would pay for a few renovations he might need to his new pad. It was a worthy accomplishment to be had. Smoke from his cigarettes filled the air as he wrote quickly and smiled at the words that poured from his mind to his fingers to the page in front of him. Everything good to go. A creak forced him to cease his writing as he raised his head up from the laptop. True, this was an old castle, and the floors were older, but the difference between a settling interior and someone stepping on a creaky board was clear in his mind. He took the cig from his mouth. Hello, silence. He turned back to the laptop and continued to write, keeping a mild alert as he focused on the story. He continued smoking his cigarette, clacking away on the keyboard buttons and typing up an extremely provocative moment of the storyboard's sexual relationship. Suddenly, the creaking sound caught his ear again, and he stood up from the desk, turning to scan the room intently. Silence, nothing. He was alone. Of course, if ghosts were real, he was going to be screwed, since he didn't actually know what destroys ghosts. However, there were other things he had a key understanding of. Yawning, he shook his head and closed the laptop, moving out of the office for his bedchamber. Stripping his clothes down to his underwear, Clyde crawled into the bed and laid his head on the pillow. It wasn't too late, but he preferred a good night's sleep, and that was what he needed right now. Fuck the evil spirits. He'd deal with whatever in the morning. Unbeknownst to Clyde, there was something in the castle, but it wasn't a ghost. The panel on the ceiling slowly moved aside as a pale hand reached down to slowly move from the hiding place. The hand, then arm, then body, and finally, the person came out of the ceiling and stood within the shadows of the room. The figure stared at the bed, watching the sleeping man, their hand moving lower until a spot was touched. Despite the naughty urge and powerful position of stalking this new intruder, the figure had another urge that was encompassing over any others. The figure slowly crept towards the man in the bed, hand prepared to reach forward and overpower him before he could get an idea of what was going on. The seconds passed slowly as the figure took note of the man's bag near his bed, curious as to what he had and eager to finish him off so as to pilfer the spoils. The urge unable to be controlled, the figure moved into the small light in the room to reveal her beautiful face and long hair, her skin pallid, her eyes black as ebony, and her ruby lips bearing a pair of fangs. She opened her mouth and slowly, she began to move down to the sleeping man. One more second, and she would sink her teeth into his neck, taking the nectar of life from her prey. Without warning, the man rolled over and swung his fist, knocking the woman down to the stone floor. He leapt out of bed, covering the dazed woman with a sheet, pushing down on her with his weight. He laughed. "I don't know what you were thinking before, but this is the point where you should start thinking about what you want on your tombstone." The woman under the sheet hissed uncontrollably as she attempted to get out of the sheet. However, Clyde had her pinned, and he wasn't about to let her go. He thought back to earlier that day and remembered the conversation with the driver. Realizing just who the woman was beneath him, he smiled, speaking firmly. "I'm Clyde. You must be Baroness Sibylla Horrifying. It's a pleasure." With a quick slam, Clyde managed to temporarily knock the woman out beneath him. Quickly, he reached in his bag and pulled out a clove of garlic. It would keep the little bitch from doing anything rash while he bound her up. He placed it on the sheet over her face and rushed to tie her up. It was true, he didn't know much about ghosts or ghouls. Vampires were another story. Clyde had Sibylla in one of the wooden chairs that adorned the castle, and her hands bound behind her back. Her black dress shrouded her in mystery. He smiled at his handiwork, having made sure to surround her with garlic cloves and had a few extra implements near him. He knew she would attempt to escape, but he had planned for something like this and had even published a book about it. Sibylla wasn't going anywhere without his assistance. However, he wasn't very keen on helping her. Grabbing the plastic bottle of water he'd opened after breaking a sweat, he splashed her face with it and watched as she came back to consciousness. Quickly realizing her situation, she looked up at him and hissed like a female fox. He wagged his finger at her. Either speak clearly or shut the fuck up." She looked at him with narrow eyes. The garlic smell burned her nose as she shook her head and tried to free her hands from the cords, but to no avail. She growled, trying like crazy to free herself, only for Clyde to fake clap at her struggles. Finally relenting, she looked at him. "What do you intend to do to me?" "Oh, so you can speak." Clyde feigned surprise. "Fair question. The answer, whatever I want. You cannot imprison me." Sibylla spoke coldly. "I am a baroness, and this is my castle." "Actually," Clyde interjected, "this is my castle. I bought it from the company that owned it. Ironically, I believe they were called Horrifying as well. Therefore, at best, you're part of the castle, and I own you as well. At worst, you're a trespasser, and I have the legal right to kill you now. I'll let you choose which fits you best." "I cannot. I'm not," Sibylla growled, the words stinging as she realized that it must have been a descendant of hers that sold the family castle. This man was obviously not interested in having her as a tenant, and to be regulated to a simple fixture was not befitting of her noble blood. She looked down and spoke softly. "I am a trespasser then, and I should be destroyed. Thus I ask that you release me from this cold body. Clyde watched as she resigned to her fate. It was almost heartwarming and honorable for her to do so. However, this was his castle. As she had tried to kill him, she wasn't getting off so easily. He shook his head, grasping her hair to force her to look at him. Honorable choice. However, I'm sorry to say I must refuse your request. You may be a cold shell of the once powerful Baroness, but you're my property now, and I have great plans for you. I am not property. She attempted to decline, but was slapped across the face and forced to be silent. Clyde was in no mood to argue with the woman. He shook his head at her. You are undead. You ceased having rights as a person when your heart stopped beating. Now, I have questions for you, and if you don't answer or lie to me, I will make you regret it. Turning to face him, she leered and spoke solemnly. What questions? I know you're dead, but I assume everything works correctly, and you're able to get wet, yes? He inquired, forcing her to look away as the words sunk in. She closed her eyes, nodding swiftly. Clyde grabbed a crucifix from the counter and held it to her face, forcing her to hiss in fear as the mere sight burned her eyes. He spoke again. Yes or no? Yes, yes, yes. She screamed. Please take it away. Clyde smiled, moving the crucifix away from her face. Good. Now that we understand each other, do you have the ability to experience pleasure? Sibylla sobbed. Yes, yes. Do you heal quickly or not? Answer me truthfully or else I'll fucking throw you into the sunlight. Clyde growled, his patience already growing thin with the vampiress before him. Sibylla sighed, looking up at him. I heal with blood. It repairs what injuries I may receive, and I will be renewed once I feed. Sunlight will not destroy me. It merely weakens my body and forces me to seek shelter in the darkness. Do these answers satisfy you? Are they the truth? Yes, I swear. All is true. Good girl. He replied. Again, my name is Clyde, but you will refer to me as Master. Why these questions, Master? Sibylla asked, looking at him curiously. She would humor Clyde until she could get away and possibly kill him, so it was good to play the game to keep him from using any more vile instruments against her. Clyde turned to look at her, rubbing his chin. You'll find out soon enough. Oh, and one more question. Yes, Master. Do you grow your hair or teeth out? They're very beautiful, he asked. She shook her head. He was asking intriguing questions to her. She was truly curious as to what he was interested in. She spoke slowly. No, Master. My hair has been long since I died, and my teeth are the same. Excellent response. Clyde nodded, walking behind her to his desk. She tried to turn to face him, or at least see what he was doing. However, she could not. She moved her wrists again to attempt to free herself. However, she was bound with cords she had never seen before. She sighed, sitting back to wait for him to return. Suddenly, her hair was gripped tightly, and the sound of metal entered her ears. She attempted to shake her head, only to see her long hair fall down the front of her face. She hissed, "What are you doing?" "I don't like long hair," Clyde replied, cutting her long locks off with a pair of office scissors and dropping the hairs into her lap. She squealed, angrily trying to stop him from cutting any more off. Her hair was one of her favorite attributes. Now, she was being sheared like a spring sheep. This was something she had never imagined in her entire existence, even when she was alive and living as a noble woman. Clyde slid his finger in her hole, earning a hissing moan from the vampire slave, and took that as a good sign, quickly plunging his cock inside of her fuckhole. Sibylla screamed in pleasure in the rush of pain that split through her body. She was bound, paralyzed, and completely at his mercy. He could have killed her outright. However, as the sensations of pleasure overwhelmed her and the feeling of her cunt being claimed, Sibylla realized this was a fate worse than what she expected. Clyde, her master, was going to utilize her for every need he had, whether she wanted it or not. Clyde growled in pleasure as he slammed his cock inside of her. Her pussy, tight from centuries of celibacy, made loud, wet noises as he fucked her. Sibylla felt and heard the air escape her cunt, instantly embarrassed at the sound of it. Clyde laughed. "Your twat's thanking me for this. In time you will too. Scream for me, slut. Scream for Master." Sibylla let out a hard scream as Clyde raped her. She screamed in pain and pleasure that exploded through her brain. She screamed as she felt all her power as a denizen of the dark drain from her body. She screamed as her shorn hair billowed around her. She screamed as she felt her body quaking and the massive orgasm was building up within her cump. She wasn't going to be able to hold back. Clyde laughed at her screams and upped his pace, slapping her ivory ass hard. She was dripping wet as he fucked her good. She moaned and screamed, her throat hoarse from overuse. Clyde sucked on his middle finger and forced it into her tiny little asshole, forcing her scream even harder that it filled the interior of the castle with echoes of pain. She came hard on his cock. The tightening sleeve of her velvet wet fuckhole suctioned his pole, and he couldn't hold back, spurting his own light seed inside of her. She had been fucked and used completely. She was just property now. This had not been passion, this had been violation, and she was now suffering the full consequences of eternal life. Clyde pulled out, standing over her to admire his work, and nodded in Epiphyfe and Provo. She was a perfect fuck. However, this wasn't a one-night stand, not by a long shot. He nudged the garlic away from her and allowed her to lay on her side in the fetal position, her body weak from the power of his fuck. Clyde looked at his watch and noted the time. It was 2 a.m. Thankfully, he didn't have to go to work, a little joke he still laughed at after all these years. This would give him an excellent chance to check out the basement of the castle and see if he could find a new place for his slave, especially if there were still some medieval devices for use. However, he was feeling the need to sleep himself, and he knew she wouldn't be going anywhere. Clyde crawled into bed, quickly stretching out and falling asleep. Sibylla, on the other hand, lay on her side upon the cold stone floor. Her entire existence was now nothing more than a bygone time. She had a new role, and it wasn't one she was keen on, despite that she had no say in the matter. She sobbed quietly, her cuts still leaking warm cum from within, and her hands bound tightly. After getting dressed in a pair of slacks and a polo shirt, Clyde made his way down to the basement of the castle. He was impressed by what he saw. It was clean, but the previous owners had not done away with the implements of imprisoning people from centuries before, and there were still chains hanging from the walls. He nodded. "This'll work better than I expected." Sibylla remained on the floor, her strength weakened by the fact it was daytime, and having had no nourishment from her intended victim. She remained bound by the cords. She could only wait until her new master returned to toy with her again. She closed her eyes in an attempt to sleep, but the urge to feed grew worse, and she didn't know how much longer she would last without some form of feeding. Throughout her entire undead existence, feeding had been her primary drive. She had to feed, and she had to survive. Unfortunately, now she was in a state where she needed to feed, but her body was overwhelmed by the exhaustion of the tranquilizing effect of the sun. The burning in her throat was horrendous, traumatizing. She had no way of ceasing the burn from within her body. It was horrendous. Clyde returned to the bedroom, raising Sibylla's weakened body up and pulled her as he walked backwards down the stairs. He could tell she wasn't using her strength or any form of power, which brought a smile to his face. Daylight might not have been as disastrous as the films portrayed it, but it worked as a natural tranquilizer for his plaything. Making his way into the basement, Clyde got to work connecting the chains to the cords and utilizing some additional rope he'd used for packing, hog-tying his slave before suspending her from the floor. Standing back to admire his work, he nodded and asked, "Comfortable?" "Please, master," Sibylla weakly begged. "Feed me before I wither into ash. I beg of you, master. I shall do any and all things you desire of me, but I seek nourishment. Please feed me." Clyde pondered her plea and shrugged. "I suppose I could find something for you to drink, especially since I need you to keep up your strength for the fun to come. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with something for you to consume." Sibylla sobbed as she dangled from the stone floor, her naked body bound tightly, unable to move beyond a whittle or to stop herself from swaying gently. She could feel the cold air on her cunt as her thighs had been spread in the position she was bound. The humiliation was completely unwanted, It was breaking her spirit and forcing her to realize what she already knew. Her new master had many plans for her. If only she had stayed within her hiding place. She had been hidden and away from the mind of this worthy opponent. It was absolutely painful to consider how she had been bested. He was the victor in this situation. This battle of wit had proven that her wits were overwhelmed by the urge to feed. She couldn't understand why she never considered something so grave as this. Clyde looked around the kitchen, curious as to where he could find something for his plaything to feast upon, and pondered what could be used to mix it with. He tapped his fingertips on his chin as he gave thought to the whole predicament. But then it hit him. It didn't necessarily have to be a large amount to fill her, and plus he didn't need her to be fully restored in her strength. Reaching into one of the boxes he hadn't unpacked, he pulled out a bottle of wine that he had brought with him to celebrate future book successes. Eyeing a glass, he popped the cork and filled the glass with the red liquid, taking a blade from the counter to work with. Slipping out of the castle with the blade and a receptacle, Clyde took notice of a vagrant that was sleeping against a tree in the woods. The man was dressed in rags, unkempt and filthy. He would make for a good target for his little plaything's needs. Taking the blade in hand, Clyde made his way through the trees until he came up behind the vagrant. The old man was snoring. Alcohol-induced dreams pervaded his mind as he lay. Clyde could tell the man was inebriated. The smell was completely off-putting. He whispered slowly, "Don't move, don't talk, don't even breathe." And without another word, he sunk the blade into the man's jugular. The blood began to flood almost immediately. The old man's eyes shot open as Clyde acted fast, slashing through the vagrant's throat in the process. It was good and quick. The vagrant didn't suffer beyond a few gasps and attempted gulps, the alcohol possibly hiding his pains. The old vagrant's mind filled with questions, concerns, and dreams, even as his nectar flowed from his neck. He had once had a life and been someone, yet hard times with addictions had ruined his life. Now he was bleeding out as the victim of someone he never saw coming. His scraggly silver beard turned red from the crimson that flooded out of his neck. His ragged clothing tattered and worn to the bare threads, soaked in the blood from his wound. He simply shuddered as his eyes dotted around the area in an attempt to locate who it was that had taken his life. He would never again see any of the beauty in the world that he once considered so rough. He was dead in minutes, nothing more than a memory. Taking the receptacle in hand, Clyde gripped the man's hair and tilted his head over, allowing his profusely flowing warm crimson to fill the container. This would be more than enough for Sibylla. He was going to ensure the little undead cunt had more than enough nectar to keep her going. Not enough to make her deadly, but the basic minimum she needed to be worthy of his dick. Meanwhile, Sibylla continued to stare at the stone floor beneath her, her body dangling and swaying gently as the chains moved slightly from the wind outside. She could hear the footsteps of her new master returning to torment her. The door opened and Clyde returned to the basement, smiling brightly at her. "Did you miss me?" "Yes, master," Sibylla lied, trying to sound the way she hoped he wanted to hear. Clyde maneuvered the chains in a way that propped her up to face him and took hold her jaw in his grip, smiling. She stared at him, her solid black eyes wide at the sinister look on his face and the scent of nourishment around him. She held back a hiss as he lifted the glass of wine to her lips and spoke coldly, "Drink." Gladly, Sibylla lapped at the glass of wine, swallowing it in gulps as Clyde tilted it down her open mouth. She choked gently at the burn of the wine, yet traces of her needed nectar filled her, and already she felt better than she had. Finishing, Clyde took away the empty glass and tossed it to the side of the room where it shattered. Sibylla licked her lips for any remaining liquid and turned back to him. "Thank you, master." "I don't need my plaything drying up on me," he replied, yanking the chain to send her back to the original position. "Especially when I haven't even begun to play." Sibylla shivered slightly. The feeling of his fingertips tracing along her nude body sent a wave of unease as she felt his fingers probing her pink lips.
Oh no, this is love, no.
She tried to look behind her to see what he was doing, yet couldn't get a full view and could only imagine what kind of mischief was on his mind. Clyde sunk his fingers inside of her, invading her hole without much resistance. Already she was tight again. She needed some loosening up before he would get off inside of her again. He licked his fingers and began to spread them as he went. Sibylla moaned. "Master, my loins are yours to enjoy." "Shut up, shut up," he growled, lashing her bare pale ass with his belt and earning a cry of anguish from the vampire. She was trying, he could tell, but she needed to learn to speak when spoken to. Soon, however, an idea crossed his mind, and he bent down to search through a few items he'd brought with him to the basement. Eyeing a silver crucifix, he lifted it up and walked to her. "Look at this." Sibylla looked up to see what he was holding. A crucifix, silver in the light. Maybe he was going to destroy her. Perhaps he would be merciful to her plea of mercy. She hissed as the gleam of the silver and the holiness of the item burned her eyes. "Take it away, master. Destroy me if you must, but please, do not force me to see it." "Destroy you," he chuckled, reaching down to grab her hair and pull her to face him. "Give up that thought, Sibylla. You're my property, and I have no interest in destroying what I own." Dropping her head, he moved back to her holes and took the sharp end of the bottom of the crucifix. Her cunt was moist and warm, perfect for his cock. However, her asshole was obviously going to be a matter of pure tension. Taking the point of the religious item, he angled it perfectly at her asshole and began forcing it inside of her. Sibylla screamed in agony that filled the basement with echoes. She tried to wiggle and splay her legs to cease the torture, yet there was no stopping it. Clyde watched with wide eyes as her asshole opened wide, as the silver began sloking around her hole. She wasn't going to turn into ash. This wasn't Blade. She was a real vampire from folklore. She could take it, and he was going to make her take as much as he could, regardless if she screamed until raw. Keeping the crucifix in place halfway inside of her ass, he took his rock-hard cock and began to slam inside of her dripping fuckhole. She could lie all she wanted, but the pain was forcing her to get wetter and hotter. The pain was excruciating, yet the pleasure of Clyde rumping and hive inside of her forced her screams to morph into moans of ecstasy. Her master was forcing himself into her again after violating her with a silver crucifix, and her body was loving it, cursing her for being so overcome with sensual desires. Clyde growled in pleasure, working the stake around as he slammed his cock inside of her, stretching both of her holes wide. She cried out, "Master, please, it hurts." "You don't like your toy?" Clyde laughed, ripping the crucifix out of her asshole, which forced her cunt to tighten around his cock like a vice. She screamed out louder than before. He felt her coming on his cock like a cheap whore, but he was nowhere near ready to pop his shot and pulled out of her cunt. Sibylla sighed in relief as her body overwhelmed her with pleasure and stars danced before her eyes. However, the pleasure was soon replaced by pain as something else invaded her asshole, and her master began to growl in pleasure himself. Clyde had replaced the crucifix with his cock. Her asshole was wide and warm from the effect of the silver, the greatest feeling he had ever experienced yet with this eternal fuck doll. He slapped her bare ass. "Moan for me, Sibylla. Moan for me, like the dirty fucking undead slut you are." Sibylla moaned, trying desperately to sound like she was enjoying the invasion of her ass. Eyes closed as she focused on keeping whatever pleasure she had had from the orgasm seconds earlier. She moaned hard, especially when she felt his fingers inside of her pink, as his cock continued to stretch her ass open. Clyde slipped his middle finger out to play with her soaking wet clit, the effect shooting shockwaves of electrifying pleasure over his slave and forcing her to scream out in pleasure. Clyde felt himself getting closer and closer to his release, angrily fucking her ass to push himself closer to shooting his shot. When the inevitability came, he quickly pulled out and twisted the chain, swinging her to face him, gripping her hair to yank her up to face him. Clyde rubbed out his hot white wad all over her face, making sure she caught a jet of the warm salty seed in her eyes, and drizzled the long rope over her nose to her lips. Breath dashing heavily, Clyde nodded. "You look good like that. Stick out your tongue, but keep the fangs inside." "Sibylla, eyes burning from the man's essence, slid her tongue out as long as she could, and watched through stinging pain as her master wiped his cock on her tongue. He used her tongue to clean his pole off. After this, he turned and changed the hands that held her head up in his grip. He leaned down, his lips at her ear. "Now, tell me how yummy your dirty fucking asshole tastes." Sibylla, eyes closed and body shivering from pain, pleasure, and humiliation, slid her tongue back in her mouth and grimaced at the taste, nodding to him. "It's very yummy, master. Almost as yummy as your seed." Clyde chuckled at her, dropping her head from his grasp, and gave the chains a hard push, watching as her body twisted in a circle as the chains moved. She was coming to terms with her new place in his home. There wasn't going to be a dull day on his schedule. Hey, who knew this old castle was such a fun house? Sibylla, on the other hand, sobbed through sperm-soaked tears as her body spun and her holes ached. She may have been undead, but this was not what she had hoped her eternity would become. The weather in the land had gotten colder, the nights growing frosty, and the air brought a chill to it. The castle was warm within, thankfully, but Clyde felt the overwhelming breeze in his bones when he ventured out to collect nourishment for his slave. However, it was nothing compared to the joys he found in the situation at hand. Clyde had found hundreds of ways to tease, torment, and take all the pleasure he desired from Sibylla. Her hair stayed cut and her beauty intact, yet her skin bore marks of the chains that bound her in the basement. Her holes burned with silver, and her throat bruised from the multiple uses that Clyde had subjected her to. Eternity in this way was not worthy of anyone. The door opened as Clyde walked down the staircase to the basement. He smiled to see Sibylla in her spot, hanging nude from the chains, her attempts to rest having been thwarted repeatedly. He walked up slowly, tapping on the bottom of her feet. "Good morning, Sibylla. Did you miss me?" "Master," she gasped. "I must feed, I know, and that's why I've brought you something," he replied, moving to where she could see him and holding up a blood-filled Ziploc bag. He smiled at her, hungry for some fresh kid meat. "Master, please, allow me to be free of these chains. I will not attack you. I will not harm you, but I beg to be free," she pleaded, her look almost pitiful. "Almost." Clyde laughed, grabbing the chain and giving it a spin, watching as her body twisted around in the air. He shook his head, sitting in the chair in front of her face as she spun around. "I think not. Master, please, stop, please." Her voice cried out as the spinning continued. Rolling his eyes, Clyde grabbed the chain, instantly ceasing it from spinning and bringing her face to his. He looked down at her, smiling widely. Sibylla swallowed painfully. "Why don't you just destroy me? Just send me to hell. Surely I am not worthy of your affections." Clyde drew back and slapped Sibylla across the face. Her cold skin sent a loud clapping thud as it came into contact with his palm. Gripping what was left of hair, he spat out his words. "You are more than worthy of my affections and my attention. Destruction would be a release for you, and I'm nowhere near ready to release you from anything. You've earned dessert before breakfast with that kind of talk. Master, please, I cannot partake in any more of your treats," she whimpered, only for it to fall upon deaf ears as Clyde whipped his cock from his pants and forced the full swollen length into her mouth. He began slamming his hips against her face, gripping her jaw in one hand and her hair in the other, cruelly bucking his hips. Sibylla choked and gagged, her limbs weakly flailing as she tried to break through the chains. Clyde growled, "Oh, watch those teeth or I'll break them out, one at a time." Sibylla kept her fangs away from his cock, yet in her mind, she knew she could do it. She could bite through his meat. The blood-filled appendage would sustain her enough to break the chains and unleash her vengeance upon her tormentor, her rapist, her master. Yes, she had come to see him as her master, her owner. She had been his slave for so long it seemed. She was unable to even truly consider attacking him. He had been sustaining her with blood, and whilst he had been using her against her will, she had once been a powerful tyrant of the land herself. She had bathed in the blood of innocent women to cease her aging. She had taken numerous men to bed and had them executed on a whim, even if they were satisfying to her. She had tormented children with burning villages and impaling their parents on wooden stakes that dotted her castle like a forest, even if they hadn't deserved their fate. She had been a tyrant worthy of damnation in hell, even before she was changed into a fiend of the undead. She had drank blood from her executed enemies and peasants. She had consumed them with no regard to how it made her appear. Once upon a time, Sibylla had been a warlord fighting wars against the innocent, and now she was made to suffer at the hands of one who was like her. It was a fate worse than existence without a soul. It was a fate she earned, and in her cold heart knew she deserved. It was penance. After several fierce pumps, Clyde finally came inside of her throat and kept his pole within her mouth until she had swallowed his filthy white release, culling the wilting cock from her lips. Before she could say anything, Clyde leaned in and kissed her hard, pressing his lips on her ruby lips with his eyes closed. Sibylla couldn't move and couldn't fight back. Her eyes widened before slowly closing to be in blissful ignorance of this situation. Clyde slid his tongue in her mouth, tasting himself on her tongue, savoring the sweetness of her saliva. She was his slave, and in this way, he was showing her both dominance and desire, exploring a technique of passion. She knew she was his, and he would ensure that she never lost the realization. But like all things, he wanted to ensure that she never stopped being obedient to him. She had come a long way. Even if she still occasionally begged for death or release, it was to be expected. She was not used to being a slave and a submissive, but she would come to surrender in acceptance. Someday, she would understand what his punishment was, and in a way, understand that it was the greatest act he could ever do for her. When Clyde broke the kiss, he smiled. "Did you enjoy dessert?" "Yes, master," Sibylla replied, smiling up at him. Clyde pinched her cheek and sat in the chair, pulling up the blood-soaked bag. He opened it, reaching in to pull out a gory object in hand, and held it in front of her face. "Eat some raw kidney. This should make you feel better, especially since it's still filled with the blood of that person it came from. I've kept the person on ice and in storage for you, master," Sibylla whispered, only for Clyde to shush her and push the dripping organ into her lips. She latched her fangs into it, sucking the blood from within until the organ shriveled and fell to the floor. She looked up at him. "Thank you, master." "Careful, slave." Clyde stood up. "You might start actually liking this arrangement." "I deserve nothing less," Sibylla replied, noticing that he was moving behind her. "Do with me what you wish, master." "What do you mean, nothing?" she replied, closing her eyes for the punishment he would rain down on her. She was accustomed to it. He could go for hours and utilize every painful element he could think of. She would be better suited to just acquiesce and allow him his fill of her. She wanted only death at this point. Perhaps he would eventually tire of her if she didn't struggle against him. Clyde traced the tip of his finger over her cold body and chuckled. "You know, I've never eaten undead pussy before. I wonder if the taste is sweeter than living." "Yes, master," Sibylla replied, smiling up at him. Clyde pinched her cheek and sat in the chair, pulling up the blood-soaked bag. He opened it, reaching in to pull out a gory object in hand, and held it in front of her face. "Eat some raw kidney. This should make you feel better, especially since it's still filled with the blood of that person it came from. I've kept the person on ice and in storage for you, master," Sibylla whispered, only for Clyde to shush her and push the dripping organ into her lips. She latched her fangs into it, sucking the blood from within until the organ shriveled and fell to the floor. She looked up at him. "Thank you, master." "Careful, slave." Clyde stood up. "You might start actually liking this arrangement." "I deserve nothing less," Sibylla replied, noticing that he was moving behind her. "Do with me what you wish, master." "What do you mean, nothing?" she replied, closing her eyes for the punishment he would rain down on her. She was accustomed to it. He could go for hours and utilize every painful element he could think of. She would be better suited to just acquiesce and allow him his fill of her. She wanted only death at this point. Perhaps he would eventually tire of her if she didn't struggle against him. Clyde sank his finger into her hole and latched his lips to her clitoris, sucking on it in a way that forced her to scream out, the waves of ecstasy slamming against her over and over again. He had used her in so many cruel ways, and in this moment, he was dedicating nothing but technique to her own passionate release. She would climax, regardless of the fact that she was undead. She was still overwhelmed with the realities of existence. An existence that was burning through her body as he titillated her towards her powerful and creamy release. Sibylla began to tremble and scream out in pleasure as she erupted within, creaming over Clyde's tongue within her precious slit. Standing up, Clyde smiled, rubbing over her hole a bit with his finger, and spun her around. "Taste yourself for me, Sibylla." They both moaned as Sibylla sucked off his finger with her lips and licked over it with her tongue. Her taste was like pure sugar. Clyde chuckled, pushing his finger down her throat until she gagged and he pulled it out, watching her cough. She was going to get used to him one way or another. It was only a matter of time. She was his plaything, through and through. After the overwhelming joy of eating her pussy, Clyde made his way out to the world and shut the door. Leaving the castle to find another vagrant, Clyde walked through the woods as he headed for the village nearby. He was going to find someone to provide fresh organs and bloody nectar for his plaything, especially since she was starting to come around to him. His books had been selling pretty well, and he was excited to see where it would lead. Even his new series, in which he was essentially just writing about his current life and events. The Vampire Slave series was going to be a best-selling work. It could even be his magnum opus if he pushed hard enough. For now, though, he had to find a victim to fill his receptacle and get back to Sibylla before she got any ideas. "I love you." Moving down the hill, Clyde spotted a group of them, bums hanging out around the makeshift campfire and trading a bottle of spirits around. He moved swiftly, intently, making sure to hide his tracks, lest he be tracked by any potential police in the area. Soon, however, he found himself moving like he had never moved before. It was incredible. The urge to provide blood and organs for a supernatural fuck toy could provide such adrenaline. As he crept upon the group, he hid next to a large dead tree whilst looking at the group, peeking out slightly to see them. One was falling asleep, one was drinking, and two others were smoking a shared pipe, emitting powerfully harsh smoke. It was familiar. He hadn't ever smoked it, but he could tell the scent of methamphetamine. It was destructive, and these guys were about to meet destruction sooner than the drug could bring them, at least, if he had anything to say about it. They would be right, too. A sneak attack would be best. Picking them off one at a time would be time-consuming and could cause more trouble than they were all worth, especially since they were high on crank. It was only a matter of time before Clyde leapt into the group, whipping his blade around, cleaving into faces and stomachs. The vagrants, caught off guard, attempted to fight against him. However, they found themselves too surprised by the flashing ability of Clyde to hack and slash until he had extinguished their existence. Soon, Clyde was filling the receptacles with the putrid blood of the men he had just murdered. He sat back and watched the blood pour from the warm, gaping holes. Thoughts ran through his head. He had become a murderer in this whole situation. Here he was, killing innocent people in an attempt to keep an undead and cursed woman alive for his sexual pleasure. He was truly evil. Nothing about him could undo what had been done, and he would be the worst of all of this. It was unimaginable, even if done for the sake of fiction writing and book sales. After draining as much blood as he could from the corpses, he began the trek back to the castle and arrived without ceremony, storing the blood-filled containers in the freezer. Walking down into the basement, he spoke aloud. "I have a surprise for you." He stopped talking. His eyes widened as he spotted something else completely. He realized in that minute that he had left the door to the castle unlocked and easy for anyone to enter, especially someone who may have a grudge against him. In his view, he could see a man ball deep inside of Sibylla's cunt and his grubby hands gripping her cold ivory hips. She was hissing in pain and anguish, fighting the chains in an attempt to fight off the rapist. Clyde growled, "Hey!" He ran towards the man who was raping his slave and raised his fist, ready to mollywop the man in the face. However, before he got the chance, The man turned around with a chain in hand and swung it at Clyde. The chain smashed into his face and sent him falling to the ground, his face bloody from the wounds of the metal. The rapist swung the chain wildly down on Clyde, injuring him repeatedly, cutting into his face and shirt and pants. Clyde lay where he fell, beaten and bashed, the attacker finally relenting as he admired his handiwork. He smiled. "Mister, you have a beautiful home, and your taste in women is pure perfection." Clyde spat blood from his split mouth. "Too bad you can't handle a woman without restraint, you fucking pussy." The man chuckled. "You think I need restraint against a bony slut? Shit, if you want to watch me fuck your girl without the chains, I suppose I can. Especially since you're both going to die after I bust a nut in her ass." Clyde reached in his pocket, pulling out the keys to the chains and held them up. "Here." "Thanks, freak." The man took the keys, sending a swift kick to Clyde's face and knocking him into the wall. The man unlocked the chains and Sibylla dropped to the floor, only for the man to drop onto her and continue with his work. Sibylla hissed, "You should not have done that." The man rolled her over, looking down at her as he sunk his cock in and out of her hole. "Yeah, why's that?" Sibylla did not respond, her insides being ripped to shreds by his hard cock, and her eyes rolling back from the pleasure. Instead, she began to focus her strength. It wouldn't take much for her. She'd just need to make one swift move against the guy. The man growled, slapping her face. "I asked you a question, bitch, because..." Sibylla's eyes shot open. "I'm hungry." Before the man could say anything, Sibylla raised her face to his neck and dug her fangs into his jugular vein, piercing into it. The rapist screamed in pain as though fire exploded through his body. Sibylla sucked and drank the blood from his wounded neck. She felt her whole body growing stronger, faster, quicker. Kicking the man off of her, she stood up, her stark nudity glowing in the moonlight. She looked down at the man, his hand gripping at his bloody neck, and his gasps for air becoming louder. She grabbed him by his hair and yanked him to his knees. "You should know better than to touch another man's property." And with a loud crunch, she twisted his head around until his spine shattered within his neck. The man's body fell and lay still. The fiery venom that had spewed from Sibylla's fangs erupted within his body, and soon it charred, as though set on fire. Spinning around, Sibylla looked down to see Clyde laying crumpled against the wall, his body covered in blood and wounds. She knelt in front of him. "Master, are you alive? Are you okay?" Clyde looked at her out of his swollen right eye. His left eye had been splattered by the end of the man's chain. He swallowed gently and sighed. "I should have locked the doors, Sibylla. I am sorry, master." She sighed, pulling him against her naked body. "Allow me to turn you into a vampire, and I will serve you into eternity." Now, he shook his head, caressing her cold cheek. "Leave this castle and be free of me and it, Sibylla. I only hope you will one day understand." "Master, are you sure?" "Yes," Clyde replied, pulling her down to kiss him. "Go and find your new purpose for existing forever. Farewell." She kissed him again. "Master." Clyde smiled. His heart slowed and his breathing ceased. He went limp and still in her arms. Sibylla sunk her fangs into his neck quickly, releasing her venom into his veins, and drank from his crimson within, watching as he slowly transformed before her eyes. She laid him down and stood up, watching as he transformed into one of the undead like her. When he stirred, he looked up at her. "Sibylla, I ordered you to be free and let me die." "Yes." She nodded, pulling him up to his feet. "You set me free, and now, with my freedom, I have decided I must have my own slave, you." Before Clyde could say or do anything, Sibylla lashed the chains to his wrists and tore his bloody clothes from him. He attempted to fight back, attempted to break the chains, and attempted to stop her. Yet there was nothing he could do. It was over. Sibylla smiled. "You are now all mine, Clyde. Now you must endure every single thing that you did to me. Only now there is no end, and eternity shall be our shared hell." Clyde looked at her. "You should have let me die." "Yes." Sibylla smiled, slapping his pale ass. "You should have done the same for me. Now, It's too late. Walking out of the dungeon, Sibylla listened as Clyde screamed and raged, how he cursed and cussed her out. She smiled and closed the door, imprisoning him within. The castle was hers again, and she would continue to enjoy it as she had for so many years. She would leave in the night for her innocent victims. She would consume their blood and collect it for her slave. It would be a justifiable reason to relieve them of their life force. Sibylla would be just as she had long ago. Only now, she would not do away with her sex slave. She would continue to taunt, torment, torture, tease, and exploit every bit of him. His books would keep selling, and he had the ownership of the castle, but that was the end of his usefulness, outside of the gratification she would take from him. The castle would grow in its legend of being haunted. The screams from within would live in the stone walls. The sheer brutality she would visit down upon Clyde would feed her image and confidence to return to what she had once been. Sibylla had paid her penance, and now she was ready to engage in her sinful behavior as once before. Nobody would come looking for them now. Now Clyde was her plaything, and just like her, he was undead.